The millionaire ignored his daughter's tears for days, until the maid said 3 words that changed everything. Welcome back to our incredible storytelling community. If this is your first time here, you're in for something special. And if you're a returning viewer, thank you for being part of our family. Before we begin today's powerful story, please hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Trust me, you won't want to miss the stories we share here. And I absolutely love connecting with our global audience. So please tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Whether you're in Miami, Denver, Chicago, or anywhere else in the world, your presence makes our community stronger. Today's story will touch your heart and remind you that sometimes the most important lessons come from the most unexpected sources. This is the story of how 3 simple words from a housekeeper changed a millionaire's life forever and saved a relationship that was on the brink of being lost forever. Chapter 1. The Widower's Fortress. The morning sun cast long shadows across the manicured grounds of the Riverside estate in Westchester County, New York, where millionaire businessman David Riverside sat in his mahogany-paneled home office, surrounded by the trappings of success that had consumed his life for the past 3 years. Stock market reports glowed on multiple monitors, while his phone buzzed incessantly with calls from investors, board members, and business partners who demanded his constant attention. At 42, David had built Riverside Capital Management into one of the most successful investment firms on the East Coast. But success had come at a price he was only beginning to understand. The house felt more like a museum than a home, filled with expensive artwork and furniture that his late wife Catherine had chosen with such care and love. Every room held memories that David found too painful to face, so he had essentially moved his entire life into his office, emerging only for brief meals and restless nights of sleep that never seemed to restore him. The rest of the house, Catherine's reading nook by the garden window, the family room where they used to watch movies together, the kitchen where she had taught their daughter Emma to bake cookies, remained frozen in time, untouched and slowly gathering dust. Mr. Riverside. The soft voice belonged to Maria Santos, the housekeeper who had worked for the family for 5 years, since before Catherine's diagnosis, and through the dark months that followed. She stood in the doorway holding a silver tray with his morning coffee, her kind eyes reflecting the concern that had become a permanent fixture in her expression. "Emma is asking if you'll have breakfast with her before she leaves for school." David barely looked up from his computer screen, where numbers representing millions of dollars flowed in endless streams of green and red. "Tell her, I'm in an important meeting with Tokyo. Maybe dinner tonight if this merger closes on schedule." The words came automatically, the same excuse he had used yesterday and the day before, and countless days stretching back through the months since Catherine's funeral. Maria hesitated in the doorway, her weathered hands gripping the tray a little tighter. At 55, she had raised 4 children of her own while working to support her family, and she recognized the signs of a household slowly falling apart despite its outward prosperity. She made pancakes this morning, heart-shaped ones, like her mother used to make. The mention of Catherine sent a familiar stab of pain through David's chest, but he had learned to bury such feelings beneath layers of work and determination. That's nice. Maybe tomorrow we can have breakfast together." He knew, even as he said it, that tomorrow would bring the same excuses, the same desperate need to lose himself in the familiar rhythms of profit and loss that made more sense than the complicated emotions of grief and parenthood. Through the office window, David could see Emma waiting by the circular driveway for the school bus, her small frame bundled in a winter coat that seemed too big for her 11-year-old body. She kept glancing back at the house, clearly hoping her father might emerge to say goodbye or at least wave from the window. When the bus arrived and she climbed aboard without that acknowledgement, David felt a twinge of guilt that he immediately suppressed by diving deeper into his work. The day passed in a blur of conference calls, market analysis, and strategic planning sessions. David's assistant, Rachel, had learned to schedule his meetings back-to-back, leaving no gaps where uncomfortable thoughts might intrude. By the time he looked up from his screens, the winter darkness had already settled over the estate, and he realized he had completely forgotten about his promise to have dinner with Emma. He found Maria in the kitchen, quietly cleaning up after what appeared to have been a meal for one. The heart-shaped pancakes from that morning sat untouched on a plate, now cold and forgotten beside a glass of milk that had formed a thin skin on its surface. "Where's Emma?" David asked, loosening his tie and feeling the weight of another missed opportunity. "In her room doing homework," Maria replied, her voice carefully neutral. She had learned not to express her opinions too directly, but David could read the disappointment in her posture. She waited until 8 o'clock for dinner. "I saved you a plate in the refrigerator." David nodded absently, his mind already shifting to the Asian markets that would be opening soon and the opportunities they might present. "Thanks, Maria. I'll probably work late tonight, so don't worry about me. And tomorrow I'll make sure to have breakfast with her." But Maria had heard these promises before, and as she watched David disappear back into his office fortress, she knew that tomorrow would likely bring more of the same. Upstairs, Emma sat at her desk struggling with math homework that would have been easy if she had someone to help her understand the concepts, someone to encourage her when she got frustrated, someone to notice that she was slowly drowning in loneliness and confusion. The house settled into its nightly routine of isolation, with David buried in his work, Emma quietly suffering in her room, and Maria moving through the halls like a guardian angel, trying to hold together the broken pieces of a family that had forgotten how to be a family. Chapter 2. The silent cry for help. 3 weeks later, the pattern had only deepened, and the riverside house had taken on the atmosphere of a luxury hotel where strangers happened to live under the same roof. David's days began before sunrise with international calls to London and Hong Kong, continued through marathon meetings with potential clients, and ended well past midnight as he obsessed over market trends and investment opportunities that might yield another few percentage points of return for his wealthy clientele. Emma had stopped asking for her father's attention in obvious ways, but Maria noticed the subtle signs that a grieving child was slowly disappearing into herself. The 11-year-old had developed a habit of setting 2 places at the breakfast table every morning, arranging the silverware with careful precision and even folding napkins the way Catherine had taught her, only to eat alone while her father remained locked behind his office door. She would linger by the kitchen window after school, watching for his car to return from the city, her face lighting up with hope that dimmed a little more each day when he rushed past her with barely a nod. "Mrs. Santos," Emma said one Thursday afternoon, using the formal address that somehow felt appropriate in their increasingly formal household. "Do you think my dad is mad at me?" Maria paused in her dusting, her heart breaking at the question she had been dreading. Emma sat at the kitchen island, her schoolbooks spread around her like barriers, her dark hair falling forward to hide eyes that looked far too old for her young face. "Oh, mija," Maria said gently, using the Spanish endearment that had slipped out naturally. "Your father is not angry with you. He is lost right now. Sometimes when people are very sad, they forget how to see the people who love them most." Emma looked up with the kind of desperate hope that only children can muster in the face of adult incomprehension. "But Mama always said that families stick together when things are hard. She said that's what families do." The innocent wisdom of the statement hit Maria like a physical blow. Catherine had indeed said those words, many times during the final months when she was preparing Emma for a future without her mother's guidance. She had made Maria promise to watch over both David and Emma, to help them find their way back to each other when the worst of the grief had passed. That evening, Maria knocked on David's office door with unusual persistence, waiting through his distracted "come in" before entering with a dinner tray she knew he wouldn't eat, and determination he rarely saw from his typically deferential housekeeper. "Mr. Riverside, I need to speak with you about Emma." David glanced up briefly from his computer screens, his mind still half-focused on a complex derivatives trade he was structuring. "Is she sick? Does she need to see a doctor?" "She needs to see her father," Maria replied with quiet firmness that made David finally look at her fully. "She is struggling in school. Her grades are dropping. Her teacher called today. Emma fell asleep in class again, and when they woke her up, she was crying." The information penetrated David's consciousness like stones thrown into still water, creating ripples of concern that he tried to suppress. "She's always been a good student. Catherine made sure of that. Maybe she just needs a tutor, or she needs her papa," Maria interrupted, something she had never done in 5 years of employment. "She sets a place for you at breakfast every morning and waits until the food gets cold. She asks me every day if you might have dinner with her tonight. She pretends to do homework in the living room instead of her bedroom because she hopes you might walk through and notice her." David felt a familiar tightness in his chest, the same feeling that overwhelmed him whenever the carefully constructed barriers between work and family began to crumble. "Maria, I appreciate your concern, but Emma needs stability right now. Financial security. I'm building something for her future, making sure she'll never have to worry about—" "She is worrying right now," Maria said, her voice rising slightly with uncharacteristic emotion. "She thinks you blame her for her mother's death. She thinks if she had been a better daughter, maybe Catherine would have fought harder to stay alive." The words hit David like a physical assault, forcing him to confront truths he had been desperately avoiding. Emma's guilt, her confusion, her desperate need for reassurance, all of it had been happening right under his nose while he buried himself in spreadsheets and profit margins. That's ridiculous," David stammered, but even as he said it, he realized he had given Emma no evidence to the contrary. "Of course I don't blame her. Catherine's cancer had nothing to do with—" He stopped, unable to finish the sentence that would require him to acknowledge the reality of his wife's death. Maria watched him struggle with the emotions he had been suppressing for months, recognizing the moment when denial began to crack under the weight of paternal love that had never really disappeared, only gone into hiding. "Tomorrow is Friday," she said gently. "Maybe you could leave work early. Maybe you could have dinner with your daughter and tell her these things yourself." But Friday brought a crisis in the European markets that demanded David's immediate attention, and dinner became another broken promise in a growing collection of disappointments that was slowly teaching Emma that she could not rely on her father's word or presence. Chapter 3. The Breaking Point. The October rain drummed steadily against the windows of the riverside estate as Emma sat in her bedroom, staring at a half-finished school project about family traditions that felt like an impossible assignment. How could she write about family traditions when her family seemed to have stopped existing altogether? Her mother's absence was a constant ache, but her father's presence without presence felt even more confusing and painful. Downstairs, David paced his office during a heated phone call with investors who were threatening to pull their funds from his latest venture. The conversation required all of his attention and diplomatic skills, but he found himself distracted by sounds from upstairs, footsteps in the hallway, doors opening and closing, and something that might have been crying but which he couldn't afford to investigate while millions of dollars hung in the balance. Maria moved through the house with growing concern, noting details that painted a picture of a child slowly unraveling. Emma's room, once meticulously organized like her mother had taught her, was becoming chaotic with unfinished homework assignments and art projects that started with enthusiasm, but were abandoned halfway through. The little girl had stopped eating regular meals, picking at her food during the lonely dinners Maria served in the formal dining room, while David remained locked in his office. "Emma, mija, you need to eat something," Maria coaxed that evening, finding the 11-year-old curled up on her bed with her mother's old sweater clutched against her chest like a lifeline. "I'm not hungry," Emma whispered, her voice hoarse from crying. "And my stomach hurts all the time now." Maria sat on the edge of the bed, her maternal instincts overriding the professional boundaries she usually maintained. Emma looked so small and lost, her dark hair tangled and her eyes red-rimmed from tears she had been shedding in private for weeks. "Tell me what's wrong, Corazon. Really wrong." Emma looked up with the kind of raw honesty that children sometimes share when they've reached the end of their emotional resources. "I think Daddy wishes I had died instead of Mama. He can't even look at me anymore. And I don't know what I did wrong, but I keep trying to fix it. And nothing works." The words broke Maria's heart completely, but they also crystallized her understanding of what was happening in this house. Emma wasn't just grieving her mother's death. She was slowly dying from the neglect of a father who was so lost in his own pain that he couldn't see his daughter's desperate need for connection and reassurance. That night, after Emma finally cried herself to sleep clutching Catherine's sweater, Maria made a decision that went against every instinct of professional propriety she had developed over years of domestic work. She walked down to David's office and entered without knocking, her usual deference replaced by the fierce protectiveness of someone who had watched a family destroy itself through willful blindness. David looked up in surprise, phone still pressed to his ear as he conducted another late-night call with Asian markets. "Maria, I'm in the middle of—" "Hang up the phone," Maria said, with quiet authority that seemed to fill the room. "I'm sorry, gentlemen. I'll need to call you back in a few minutes," David said into the phone, responding instinctively to something in Maria's tone that he had never heard before. "Your daughter thinks you wish she had died instead of her mother," Maria said without preamble, her words cutting through the office's expensive silence like a blade. "So she thinks she killed Catherine by not being good enough to make her want to live." David's face went white as the accusation hit him with the force of absolute truth. "Maria, that's not... I would never... When did you last have a real conversation with her? Not about homework or schedules, but about how she's feeling, about what she remembers about her mother, about whether she's okay." David opened his mouth to respond, then closed it as he realized he couldn't remember. The days had blurred together in a haze of work and avoidance, and somewhere in that blur, he had lost track of his daughter's emotional needs entirely. "She made you a card last week," Maria continued relentlessly. "Far for no special occasion, just because she wanted to tell you she loves you. It's been sitting on your desk for 4 days, under that stack of financial reports you never moved." David's eyes moved to his desk, and sure enough, there was a corner of colorful construction paper peeking out from beneath a pile of documents. He had been too busy to file properly. He pulled out the card with trembling hands, opening it to reveal Emma's careful handwriting. "Dear Daddy, I know you're sad about Mama, but I love you very much, and I hope we can be happy together again someday. Love, Emma. P.S. I remember how to make Mama's famous chocolate chip cookies if you want to help me." The simple, heartbreaking message shattered the emotional walls David had built around himself, and for the first time since Catherine's funeral, he felt the full weight of what he had been doing to his daughter in the name of protecting her through financial success. "She's been trying to reach you for months," Maria said, her voice softening as she saw understanding begin to dawn in David's eyes. "Every morning when she sets your place at breakfast, every evening when she waits by the window for you to come home, every night when she asks me to tell her stories about when you and Catherine were young and happy." David stared at the card, seeing not just Emma's words, but the careful way she had drawn little hearts around the border, the deliberate choice of his favorite color for the construction paper, the hope and love that radiated from every carefully formed letter. "What have I done?" he whispered, the question directed more to himself than to Maria. Chapter 4. The 3 words that changed everything. The next morning arrived grey and cold, with November frost covering the estate's carefully maintained gardens, like a crystalline reminder that winter was approaching and time was running out for healing the wounds that had been festering in the riverside house for too long. David sat in his office before dawn, not working for the first time in months, but staring at Emma's card and trying to understand how he had allowed himself to become so lost in grief that he had abandoned the one person who needed him most. He could hear the familiar sounds of morning routines above him, Emma getting ready for school, her footsteps moving between her bedroom and the bathroom, the soft closing of doors as she tried not to disturb the father, who she believed no longer wanted to be disturbed by her presence. The sounds that had become background noise suddenly seemed precious and fragile, as if he was hearing them for the first time. Maria appeared in the doorway with coffee, but instead of her usual quiet efficiency, she studied David's face with the careful attention of someone assessing whether a crucial conversation had taken root or would need to be repeated. "She's leaving for school in 15 minutes, Maria said simply. David nodded, understanding that this was an invitation, and possibly his last chance to begin repairing the damage he had done through months of benign neglect. He stood up slowly, his body protesting after countless hours hunched over computer screens, and walked toward the stairs with the uncertain gait of someone entering unfamiliar territory. Emma's bedroom door was slightly ajar, and through the gap, David could see his daughter sitting on her bed, carefully packing her school bag with the methodical precision Catherine had taught her. She was humming softly, a song Catherine used to sing while cooking dinner, and the sound nearly broke David's resolve to actually enter the room and face the conversation he had been avoiding. "Emma," he said softly, knocking on the doorframe. She looked up with startled surprise, her dark eyes wide with the kind of hope mixed with wariness that develops in children who have learned not to expect too much from the adults in their lives. "Hi, Daddy. Are you okay? You're not in your office." The simple observation hit David with the realization of how completely he had isolated himself from his daughter's daily life. To Emma, seeing him outside his office during morning hours was genuinely unusual, worth commenting on with the same surprise she might reserve for seeing snow in July. I thought maybe we could walk to the bus stop together this morning." Emma's face lit up with cautious joy, but she quickly suppressed it, as if afraid to show too much enthusiasm in case the offer disappeared. "Really? But don't you have important calls to make?" "Nothing more important than walking my daughter to school," David said, and as the words left his mouth, he realized they were the truest thing he had said in months. They walked down the circular driveway in companionable silence, Emma stealing glances at her father as if trying to memorize this unexpected moment of attention. The November air was crisp and clean, carrying the scent of dying leaves and the promise of winter, and David found himself noticing details he had missed during his months of self-imposed isolation. The way Emma had grown taller, the way she still skipped every third step when she was happy, the way she looked so much like Catherine when she smiled. "Daddy," Emma said as they reached the end of the driveway, "are you sad because Mama died, or are you sad because you're stuck with me now?" The question was asked with the devastating honesty that only children possess, and it stopped David dead in his tracks. He knelt down on the cold asphalt, bringing himself to Emma's eye level. And for the first time in months, he really looked at his daughter, not as an obligation or a responsibility, but as the precious gift Catherine had left behind, the living embodiment of their love and hopes for the future. "Emma, listen to me very carefully," David said, his voice thick with emotion he no longer tried to suppress. "I am not stuck with you. You are the most important thing in my life, and I have been a terrible father because I was so afraid of losing you too, that I forgot how to show you how much I love you." Emma's eyes filled with tears, but they were different tears than the ones she had been crying alone in her room. These were tears of relief and recognition, the tears of a child who had been drowning in confusion and was finally being thrown a lifeline of understanding. "I miss Mama so much," Emma whispered, "and I was scared that if I missed her too much, you would go away too." David pulled his daughter into his arms, holding her against his chest while they both cried openly for the first time since Catherine's funeral. They stood there in the morning cold, father and daughter finally sharing their grief instead of carrying it alone, while Maria watched from the kitchen window with tears of her own. When the school bus appeared around the corner, Emma pulled back slightly to look at her father's face. "Will you be here when I get home? I mean, really here, not just in your office." "I'll be right here waiting for you," David promised. "And maybe we can make those chocolate chip cookies you mentioned in your card." As Emma climbed onto the bus, her face radiant with happiness for the first time in months, she turned back to wave at her father. David stood in the driveway waving back until the bus disappeared around the corner, then walked slowly back to the house where Maria was waiting with a knowing smile. "Thank you," David said simply. Maria nodded, her own eyes bright with tears. "She just needed to know she matters more than your work. That's all any child needs to know." But as David returned to his office, he realized that knowing Emma needed him and actually reorganizing his life to prioritize her needs were two very different challenges. The Asian markets were still demanding his attention. Clients still expected immediate responses to their concerns, and the financial empire he had built still required constant management to maintain its success. The real test would come that afternoon, when Emma returned from school expecting to find a father who was present not just physically, but emotionally available for the difficult work of rebuilding their relationship. Chapter 5. The New Beginning. The afternoon sun streamed through the kitchen windows as David stood at the counter, staring at Catherine's handwritten recipe for chocolate chip cookies with the same intensity he usually reserved for complex financial documents. His hands shook slightly as he measured flour into a mixing bowl, not from nervousness about baking, but from the profound significance of this simple domestic act that represented his first real step toward reclaiming his role as Emma's father. Maria moved quietly around the kitchen, offering gentle guidance without taking over the process that needed to belong to David and Emma alone. She had rearranged her afternoon schedule to be present for this crucial moment, understanding that successful healing often required witnesses who could provide support without interference. When the school bus pulled up outside, David felt his heart rate increase with an anxiety that was entirely different from the stress of high-stakes business negotiations. This was the anxiety of someone who had made promises and needed to prove he could keep them. Someone who understood that his daughter's emotional well-being hung in the balance of whether he could follow through on his commitment to be present and engaged. Emma burst through the kitchen door with the kind of explosive energy that only 11-year-old children can generate. Her face flushed from the cold and bright with anticipation that she was trying hard to contain in case her father had changed his mind during the day. "Daddy, you're really here," she exclaimed, then caught herself and tried to appear more subdued. "Hi, Daddy, how was your workday?" David smiled at her attempt at mature conversation, recognizing Catherine's influence in Emma's instinctive politeness, even in moments of high emotion. "My workday was fine, but I've been looking forward to making cookies with you all afternoon. I found Mama's recipe, and I think we're going to need your expertise to make sure I don't mess it up." Emma's face transformed with pure joy as she ran to wash her hands at the kitchen sink, chattering excitedly about everything she remembered about baking with Catherine, which ingredients to add first, how to tell when the butter was the right consistency, the secret of adding just a little extra vanilla for the perfect flavor. Working side by side at the kitchen counter, David discovered that his daughter was remarkably skilled for her age, her small hands confident and precise as she demonstrated techniques Catherine had taught her. More importantly, he discovered that Emma had been storing up months of conversations she had wanted to have with him. Stories about school and friends and dreams that came pouring out as they mixed ingredients and shaped dough into perfect circles. "Jessica Morrison in my class has parents who are divorced," Emma said as she carefully placed cookies on the baking sheet. "She says she likes it because she gets 2 birthday parties and 2 Christmases, but I don't think she really likes it. I think she just says that because it's easier than admitting she's sad." David paused in his measuring of chocolate chips, recognizing the deeper question beneath Emma's observation. "Are you worried about Daddy and Mama being apart now?" Emma nodded solemnly. "Sometimes I dream that you decide you don't want to be my daddy anymore because it's too hard without Mama to help you. And sometimes I dream that I go to live with Grandma and Grandpa and you sell our house and move somewhere far away." The confession hit David with the full force of understanding just how deeply his emotional absence had affected his daughter's sense of security. Emma hadn't just been missing his attention, she had been living in constant fear of abandonment, wondering if the remaining parent would decide that raising her alone was too difficult or painful. "Emma, look at me," David said, setting down the measuring cup and turning to face her fully. "I'm never going to stop being your daddy. Never. Not when you're 12, not when you're 16, not when you're 36 and have children of your own. You are stuck with me for the rest of your life, whether you want to be or not." Emma giggled at his use of her own words from that morning, but her eyes remained serious. "But what if I make you too sad, because I remind you of Mama?" David knelt down beside the kitchen counter, bringing himself to Emma's eye level once again. "You do remind me of Mama. Every single day, the way you scrunch up your nose when you're thinking hard, the way you organize your art supplies by color, the way you hum when you're happy, you are so much like her that sometimes it takes my breath away." "And that makes you sad?" "Sometimes it makes me sad because I miss her so much," David admitted honestly, "but mostly it makes me grateful, because having you means I get to see Mama's best qualities every day. You are not just my daughter, Emma. You are the most beautiful part of your mother that she left behind for me to love and protect and watch grow into an amazing person." Emma's eyes filled with tears, but they were good tears, healing tears that washed away months of confusion and self-doubt. She threw her arms around David's neck, and he held her close, breathing in the scent of her hair that still carried traces of the strawberry shampoo Catherine had always used. As the cookies baked and filled the kitchen with the warm, sweet aroma that had always meant home and family, David and Emma talked about everything they had been unable to say during the long months of parallel grieving. They talked about Catherine's final weeks and the promises she had made them both keep. They talked about school and friends and the loneliness that had been eating away at Emma's confidence. They talked about David's work and why he had thought burying himself in business was the best way to honor Catherine's memory and provide for Emma's future. "Mama told me that the best way to remember her was to keep loving each other," Emma said, as they sat at the kitchen table sharing warm cookies and cold milk. She said that families don't stop being families just because someone goes to heaven. Maria, who had been quietly cleaning in the background, paused in her work to listen to the conversation she had been hoping to hear for months. "Your mama was right," David said, "and I'm sorry it took me so long to remember that. I thought if I worked hard enough and made enough money, I could protect you from ever being hurt again. But what you really needed was for me to be here with you, sharing the hurt so neither of us had to carry it alone." As the evening progressed, David found himself rediscovering the simple pleasures of fatherhood that he had abandoned in his grief, helping Emma with her homework, listening to her stories about friends and teachers, reading together on the couch in the living room that had been empty for too long. When bedtime arrived, he tucked her in for the first time in months, reading from the same book of fairy tales Catherine had loved. "Daddy," Emma said, as he was about to turn off her bedside lamp, "tomorrow is Saturday. Could we maybe have pancakes for breakfast? Heart-shaped ones?" David smiled, remembering the cold pancakes Maria had shown him that first morning, when he had been too busy to notice his daughter's attempt to connect with him through food and tradition. "Say heart-shaped pancakes sound perfect," he said, "and maybe after breakfast, we could go through some of Mama's photo albums together. I think there are some pictures you haven't seen yet." After Emma fell asleep, David found Maria in the kitchen, finishing her evening cleaning routine. She looked up as he entered, her face reflecting the satisfaction of someone who had witnessed a family begin to heal itself. "Thank you," David said again, the words carrying months of gratitude he hadn't known how to express. Maria smiled, folding the dish towel with her usual precision. "You don't need to thank me, Mr. Riverside. I just reminded you of what you already knew but had forgotten. Emma is lucky to have a father who loves her enough to change." As Maria gathered her things to leave for the evening, she paused at the kitchen door. "Tomorrow, when you make those heart-shaped pancakes, remember that the shape matters less than the love you put into making them together." David nodded, understanding that Maria's wisdom extended far beyond housekeeping and childcare into the deeper truths about what families needed to survive and thrive through even the most difficult circumstances. That night, for the first time since Catherine's death, David slept peacefully, knowing that his daughter was safe and secure in the knowledge that she was loved, wanted, and valued above all the success and wealth he had thought were the most important gifts he could give her. The next morning, as promised, David and Emma made heart-shaped pancakes together, and the kitchen filled with laughter and conversation and the kind of ordinary magic that makes a house into a home and strangers into a family once again. The end. This story reminds us that success means nothing if we lose the people we love most in the pursuit of it. Sometimes the most important words we can hear are simple ones that redirect our attention to what truly matters. Thank you for joining us for this emotional journey. If this story touched your heart, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe for more meaningful stories, and tell us in the comments about a time when someone's simple words changed your perspective completely. Remember, the people who love us don't need our perfect success. They need our imperfect presence.